The October skies over England were pale and cold, streaked with contrails that hung like white scars above the RAF base at Bovingdon. On the wet tarmac, men in olive drab watched a silver giant descend from the clouds. The newest B-17F Flying Fortress, serial number 4124485. Its 4 engines hummed with the deep mechanical authority that seemed to echo across the entire airfield. When its wheels touched the ground, few realized that this particular fortress would one day become a symbol of endurance, faith, and the fragile mathematics of survival. Assigned to the 324th Bomb Squadron, 91st Bomb Group, the aircraft was just another machine in a long line of flying fortresses arriving from the factories of Seattle. But among the crews, rumors spread quickly. This one had something about it. A smoothness in the engines, a shimmer in the aluminum, a sense of presence. It was as if fate itself had rolled onto the runway. Captain Robert Morgan, the man who would command her, stood beside his co-pilot, James Veronis, navigator Charles Layton, and the rest of his crew. Engineer Eugene Adkins, top turret gunner Levy Dillon, ball turret gunner Cecil Scott, and tail gunner John Quinlan. They were young, many of them not yet 25, their faces both eager and uncertain. Morgan was older, steadier, a man whose calm voice could still the cockpit, even when flak burst like black flowers around them. That night in the officers' mess, Morgan told his crew he wanted to name the ship after his girl back home in Tennessee, Margaret Polk, the little one he'd promised to return to. But little one sounded too fragile for a war machine built to punch through walls of steel and fire. One evening, while watching a John Wayne film, Morgan and Veronis saw a riverboat named Memphis Belle. The name struck like destiny. It carried both love and defiance, a beauty wrapped in armour. Within days, the nose of the aircraft bloomed with colour. From an Esquire magazine pin-up drawn by George Petty, ground artist Tony Stasser painted a figure of a woman, one side red, one side blue, reclining with the casual grace of an American dream. Beneath her, in bold script, the name Memphis Belle. The men whistled when they saw it. "She'll bring us home," one said quietly. On November 7th, 1942, the Belle flew her first combat mission, a strike against the submarine pens at Brest, France. The morning frost had not yet melted on the runways when Morgan throttled the engines to full power, and the heavy bomber shuddered down the strip. Inside the cabin, the crew sat in their stations, their breath fogging the glass, their hearts pounding to the same metallic rhythm. The fortress climbed into the grey, joining the formation that stretched from horizon to horizon, an airborne cathedral of steel, carrying a congregation of mortal men. From below, the people of Bovingdon watched as the flying fortresses disappeared into the clouds, leaving behind the deep, resonant hum of 4-engine flight, a sound that, to those who survived the war, would forever mean courage. War did not wait long to reveal its price. After their first mission, the men of the Memphis Belle learned that luck was not a strategy. It was merely the thin air between survival and oblivion. Their second mission took them to Saint-Nazaire, the fortress city the crews grimly nicknamed Flak City. The sky above the French coast bloomed with black explosions, each puff of smoke a blossom of iron petals. The fortress trembled as shrapnel tore through the wings. The air smelled of burning oil and cordite. For hours they flew through that storm, guided only by instinct and the voice of their navigator counting bearings through static. When they returned, the ground crew counted dozens of holes in the fuselage, one near the cockpit glass, another through the radio compartment. Yet all engines still ran. Morgan wrote in his log, "She flies like she wants to live." But the missions kept coming, and each one carved deeper into the men. On November 17th, during their third sortie, A cannon shell from an FW-190 ripped through the upper turret. Levi Dillon took shrapnel in the leg, his blood pooling on the metal floor. He refused morphine, tied a tourniquet with his own parachute cord, and stayed at his post until the Belle crossed the channel. When the medics carried him out, he was still gripping the handles of his guns. Later, Morgan told the squadron surgeon, he wouldn't let go of the sky. Then came November 23rd, another raid on Saint-Nazaire. An engine failed before they reached the coast. Regulations said, turn back. Morgan hesitated, eyes fixed on the silver trail of fortresses continuing east. Finally, he throttled down and turned for home. It was a decision that saved their lives. The rest of the formation flew on and met the Luftwaffe head-on. 12 Messerschmitts, flawless in formation. 2 bombers vanished in flame. Others limped back with dead aboard. When the Belle landed, smoke was still drifting from the wreckage of returning aircraft. Men counted names on the bulletin board and realized how thin the line between courage and extinction had become. In the frozen months that followed, the rhythm of life was mechanical. Mission, debriefing, whiskey, silence. The Belle flew again and again through walls of flak, so dense it looked like black rain. They struck targets in Brest, Lorient, Rouen, Saint-Nazaire again, always Saint-Nazaire, a name that burned itself into the language of fear. By January 3rd, 1943, the crew claimed their first confirmed kill. A German fighter disintegrated under their defensive fire. The cheers were brief, almost embarrassed. Each man understood that one enemy's death meant little in the arithmetic of survival. But in the logbook, Morgan wrote, Belle fights back. The damage reports grew thicker, new holes patched over with dull aluminum, names of wounded replaced with new volunteers who came wide-eyed and left grey-faced. The fortress itself began to seem alive, patched, scarred, but defiant. Mechanics swore she hummed differently after each repair, as if she recognized their touch. Outside the barracks, snow fell quietly across the English countryside. Inside, men lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of generators, wondering which of them would still be here when spring came. By the winter of 1943, the air over Europe had become an endless theatre of metal and fire. Each mission blurred into the next, bomb racks clattering open, flak bursting like malignant stars, and the long, shivering silence that followed the debriefing. But fate, unpredictable as it was, brought a new observer to their world, Hollywood. Director William Wyler, already renowned in America for Mrs. Miniver, arrived in Britain carrying not a rifle, but a 16mm camera. He was searching for a crew to immortalize, men who could represent the spirit of the Army Air Forces without the varnish of propaganda. Wyler's first choice, a B-24 unit named Invasion 2, had been nearly annihilated over France, so he turned his lens toward the Memphis Belle. When Wyler met Captain Morgan in January, he saw not a hero, but a weary man holding his composure through sheer will. Morgan, in turn, looked at the Hollywood director with quiet skepticism. "You'll have to bring a flak jacket," he said. Wyler smiled. "I'll bring 2, one for the film." From that moment, the Memphis Belle became both a weapon and a stage. Cameras were bolted into the waist gunners' windows. Technicians wired microphones into the cockpit. When the engines roared to life, celluloid trembled beside steel. Wyler's cameramen flew real missions, recording the grim ballet of bombers weaving through tracer fire. One of them, sound engineer Harold Tannenbaum, joked that he was collecting thunder. He would never return from his last flight. On February the 4th, 1943, the Belle crossed into Germany for the first time. A daylight raid on Emden. The men felt the psychological weight of the act. They were no longer bombing ports or submarine pens. They were striking the homeland of their enemy. The flak was heavier, more precise. A shell burst near the tail, shredding the radio antenna. Yet the bomber held formation. Above the North Sea, sunlight caught the frost on the glass and turned it into a field of diamonds, beauty suspended within terror. Weiler later wrote in his notes, "They fly in a cathedral of violence, and it is almost holy." Then came March 22nd, a day seared into the memories of all who saw it. During the 17th mission over France, a sister ship, the Liberty Belle, was flying just above them. Without warning, a bomb released early, plunging through the air and smashing directly into the Liberty Belle's fuselage. The explosion tore the aircraft apart in mid-air. For a split second, the crew of the Memphis Belle saw the silhouettes of men, weightless, tumbling amid burning fragments. Then the sky was empty again. No one spoke for the rest of the flight. When they landed, Morgan sat in silence for a long time before removing his headset. The smell of cordite and oil lingered on his hands like a curse. Tragedy followed art. On April 16th, during another filming sortie, Weiler's sound engineer, Harold Tannenbaum, was killed when the B-24 he was aboard exploded over France. The director was devastated. He wrote to his wife, "I asked men to risk their lives for truth, and they paid me in blood." After that, Weiler never again looked at his camera without reverence. His lens would no longer chase glamour, only truth. Then came the Bremen raid of April 17th, the 21st mission. It was carnage in daylight. German fighters struck with merciless precision, their yellow-nosed FW-190s darting through formations like sharks. 6 bombers from the 401st Squadron were lost. The air was a tapestry of smoke and falling metal. The crew of Invasion 2, Weiler's original subjects, perished that day. When Morgan returned to base, he walked straight to Weiler and said, "If you still want your story, sir, we'll give it to you. But you film it as it is, no lies." Weiler nodded. "Only as it is." By May 1st, the crew flew again to Saint-Nazaire, a mission marred by confusion and false German radio signals that lured a neighbouring squadron off course. Amid that chaos, Maynard "Snuffy" Smith, a gunner from another group, fought alone in a burning B-17, saving the wounded and extinguishing fires mid-flight. He would become the first enlisted airman to receive the Medal of Honor. Even among the Belle's crew, his story echoed like a parable. Courage born from catastrophe. Through these months, the men grew quieter, older in their eyes. They had begun the war with banter and cigarettes. Now they spoke less, moved slower, carried the weight of ghosts invisible to anyone on the ground. Each mission was a negotiation with death, and each return a brief resurrection. Weiler's film reels captured not heroes, but human beings suspended between dread and duty. The Memphis Belle was no longer just an airplane. It was a mirror, reflecting what war does to those who must survive it. By May of 1943, the Memphis Belle had become a veteran, scarred, patched, and weary, but still flying. Each square of aluminum held the memory of flak bursts. Each rivet hummed with the ghosts of near death. The men who climbed aboard her now did so with ritual precision, silent, methodical, reverent. They no longer believed in luck, only in procedure. May 17th, 1943. The 25th mission, the last one they needed. The target, Lorient, France. The air that morning was cold and clear, a deceptive calm before the violence. Ground crews gathered to watch the takeoff, knowing what this meant. 25 missions without loss, a miracle in an age when most crews never reached 10. As the 4 engines roared to life, even the mechanics saluted. They were sending their legend to complete her circle. Inside the cockpit, Captain Morgan adjusted his oxygen mask. "Let's make it clean," he said softly. "Let's make it home, Varenus replied. The formation climbed into sunlight, silver specks against the deep blue. At altitude, the German coast rose in the distance, and with it, black smoke, flashes of flak, and the hunting cry of enemy fighters. The Luftwaffe came fast, FW-190s and Bf-109s streaking from the sun. The Belle's gunners opened fire. Tracers arced through the sky like fiery threads, stitching chaos into order. Tail gunner John Quinlan shouted over the intercom, "6 o'clock high!" And the Belle shook as bullets tore through the rear fuselage. At the left waist window, Clarence Winchell tracked a German fighter closing in. He fired in short, controlled bursts. 1, 2, 3. The enemy aircraft flared, then vanished into a blossom of flame. "Confirmed," someone murmured, almost prayerfully. For 2 hours, they endured. The smell of gunpowder mixed with sweat and hydraulic fluid. The intercom crackled with static and heartbeat voices. When the bomb bay doors opened, a hot rush of wind filled the fuselage. The bombs fell, one long metallic sigh descending toward Lorient. Below, the city flared white, then black. Turning for home, the Belle limped but held. Oil leaked down the right engine. One oxygen line was severed. But the crew stayed silent, watching the English coastline emerge like salvation through the haze. As they crossed the channel, someone began to hum, low, broken, but human. When the wheels touched down at Bassingbourn, the airfield erupted. Mechanics, medics, and officers ran toward the taxiing bomber. Morgan throttled back, removed his headset, and without a word, pushed the yoke forward, diving the Belle low across the control tower in a forbidden but unforgettable salute. The roar thundered across the base. Cheers answered it. The Belle was home. On the tarmac, Wyler's cameras were rolling. The footage would one day become the heart of his wartime documentary, The Memphis Belle, a story of a flying fortress, the first real vision of daylight war that America would ever see. In the weeks that followed, the crew disbanded. Some transferred, some rested, a few, restless, volunteered again. Morgan and Bombardier Vincent Evans would later fly a second combat tour in the Pacific aboard the B-29 Dauntless Dottie, trading the cold skies of Europe for the humid winds of the Pacific. Others faded quietly into civilian life, carrying memories they never spoke aloud. The Memphis Belle herself returned to America as a national symbol. She toured the country on a war bond drive, her polished fuselage gleaming beneath patriotic banners. Crowds gathered in every city, touching her sides as if the metal could transmit courage. Morgan spoke into microphones about duty and sacrifice, but sometimes, when the crowd thinned, he would rest his hand on the nose art, the painted figure of the girl from Memphis, and simply whisper, "You got us home." After the war, when newer aircraft claimed the skies, the Belle was left on an airfield in Arizona, her paint blistered by the sun. She was nearly scrapped for parts. It was the city of Memphis that saved her, buying the bomber for $350, preserving her in honor of the men who had flown her. Decades later, she would be fully restored and placed in the National Museum of the U.S. Air Force, shining once more beneath the hangar lights, her scars polished but remembered. Today, visitors stand beneath her wings and look up at the name, Memphis Belle. They see rivets and steel, but those who listen closely can still hear it. The pulse of engines, the crackle of intercoms, the breath of 10 men fighting not for glory, but for one more sunrise. In the broader theatre of 1943, the Memphis Belle was more than one bomber among hundreds. She became a proof of concept, a living equation that validated America's most dangerous gamble: daylight precision bombing. The British, after enduring the inferno of 1940, had turned to night raids. safer but blind. Their cities had burned under the Luftwaffe. Their answer was darkness and mass. The Americans, led by the newly formed 8th Air Force, believed daylight offered clarity, that with Norden bomb sights and courage, they could strike war industries surgically without wasting lives or tonnage. But daylight meant visibility. Visibility meant death. Every flight into occupied Europe was an act of arithmetic. For every 100 bombers sent out, only 70 might return intact. The rest fell to flak, fighters, or the cruel mathematics of weather and mechanical failure. Men spoke of flak corridors and fighter alleys, the way sailors once spoke of haunted waters. Yet the command insisted, keep flying. Keep proving that steel, organization, and faith could overcome chaos. The Memphis Belle was the proof they needed. Her 25 missions stood as statistical defiance, the first bomber to complete a full tour without loss. In her endurance, the Air Force found evidence that its doctrine could hold. That discipline, formation flying, and industrial strength could carry men through hell and back. To the generals, she was a weapon of data. To the people at home, she was something far deeper. When Wyler's footage reached American cinemas in 1944, audiences saw not actors, but real men, sweat and fear on their faces, voices cracking over intercoms. The film didn't glorify, it testified. Mothers saw the kind of courage their sons were being asked to show. Factory workers saw the machines they built being struck and yet surviving. The Memphis Belle became a sermon in motion, not of victory, but of endurance. Strategically, her legacy was transformative. Her successful tour helped justify the vast daylight campaign that would follow, the relentless destruction of German industry that paved the way for D-Day. Crews that came after flew under the weight of her legend. If the Belle could survive, so could they. The myth became morale, and morale was ammunition. In war, symbols are as vital as weapons. The Memphis Belle embodied the industrial soul of America, a nation of mechanics, dreamers, and believers forging metal wings against tyranny. Her image on posters, her name on lips, her story on the radio, they all carried a simple message: that courage, multiplied by 10, could become a fortress that flies. Yet within that symbol lay something more subtle, a tension between machinery and humanity. The doctrine of precision bombing reduced men to variables, but the Belle reminded the world that each mission's success was not mechanical, it was human. Behind every ton of explosives dropped, there was breath, sweat, pulse, fear, laughter, and the will to rise again. In her survival, the Belle united the cold science of strategy with the warm pulse of the human spirit. History remembers the Memphis Belle as a fortress of steel, but those who knew her best understood she was made of flesh, breath, and trembling hands. In the air, Morgan was a paradox, disciplined yet quietly fatalistic. His men said he never raised his voice, even when the engines screamed and the sky fell apart around them. He flew by rhythm, by feel, as if the bomber were a living creature he could coax rather than command. On the ground, he wrote short notes to his fiancée, Margaret Polk. The letters were calm, almost domestic. The clouds looked like cotton today. Tell your mother I miss her pie. Yet behind the words was the weight of unspoken exhaustion, the awareness that every letter might be his last. Years later, he would confess in an interview, the hardest part wasn't flying through flak. It was coming home to find the world had gone on without us. If Morgan was the spine, Vorenus was the breath. He carried the quiet endurance of men who bear responsibility without recognition. When the cockpit filled with smoke or the altimeter needles spun madly, Vorenus's voice was the calm in the storm, reading out airspeed, engine pressure, oxygen flow. He rarely spoke of fear. Once, when asked if he was ever afraid, he answered, "Only when I stop hearing the engines." After the war, he returned to Connecticut and refused all interviews. He kept a model of the Belle on his desk until he died, wings level, gear down, as if forever returning. Leighton was the intellectual heart of the crew, a man who saw war as geometry. He plotted bearings through flak bursts, charted lives in degrees and miles. But geometry could not contain grief. When he later visited the graves of crews who hadn't returned, he whispered the coordinates of their last known positions, as though the map itself could remember them. He once wrote in his diary, "A navigator never truly returns home. He is always finding the way for others." Quinlan lived in a world of solitude, sealed in his plexiglass dome, facing backward, forever watching death approach from behind. He saw the war differently from everyone else, in reverse. He could name the shape of every enemy fighter, the color of their traces, the second before they became light and shrapnel. He survived all 25 missions, but never escaped the sound of engines diving on him. Decades later, his son would say, "Dad still sleeps facing the door, waiting for the next attack." She waited through letters and silence, her name painted across the nose of a bomber she had never seen. When the war ended, she and Morgan tried to bridge the chasm between myth and reality, but the distance was too vast. He had changed, so had she. They parted quietly, without bitterness. Yet Polk never stopped loving the airplane that bore her name. In her later years, she became one of its fiercest advocates, raising funds for its restoration. "He didn't come back to me," she once said, "but the plane did." He came to capture courage and instead discovered fragility. In the editing rooms of London, he watched frame after frame of men staring into eternity through oxygen masks. He realized cinema could never fully contain the truth he had seen, that the camera, for all its precision, could only graze the surface of human endurance. When the Memphis Belle premiered in 1944, Wyler sat in the back of the theatre. As the film's final shot faded, the bomber landing safely, he wept silently. "We showed them surviving," he whispered, "but we did not show what survival costs." Together, they were an organism. 10 hearts beating through one body of aluminum. They were bound not by patriotism alone, but by the ancient instinct of soldiers everywhere, the will to protect the man beside you. Their humor was dark, their courage ordinary, their fear constant. Yet, in that fragile combination, they found transcendence. Each mission reshaped them, sanding away youth, revealing a harder, quieter form of humanity. When they returned to America, they smiled for photographers, but their eyes were older than the war itself. History has always mistaken courage for noise. It imagines the brave as loud, defiant, immortal. But true courage, the kind that sustained the Memphis Belle, was quiet. The sound of men checking instruments while the sky disintegrated around them. War, at its core, is an argument between belief and entropy. Nations build, nature destroys. Engineers calculate, chaos laughs. The Flying Fortress was America's answer to entropy. An attempt to build an indestructible idea from destructible materials. Rivets and hydraulics bound together by an invisible alloy. Human will. Each mission was a wager against probability. Every crewman knew the numbers. 1 in 5 would never come home. They accepted it not because they were fearless, but because they were faithful to something larger than fear. The belief that survival itself could be a weapon. To fly again after seeing others burn, that was defiance. To climb back into the same machine that nearly killed you, that was philosophy in motion. In the age of industrial warfare, heroism became systemic. The Memphis Belle was both individual and instrument. Her endurance a triumph not just of men, but of a nation's machinery, logistics, and narrative control. The United States needed her as proof that reason could defeat chaos, that organized technology could humanize destruction. But even the most rational war hides its absurdity beneath layers of purpose. Morgan's calm voice over the intercom, Varenus's steady hands, the rhythmic pounding of 50 caliber guns. All these were rituals meant to impose meaning on the meaningless. The enemy they fought never truly had a face. From 5 miles up, even the bombs looked abstract, small black dots vanishing into geometry. Only later, in silence, did the faces return. Weiler's camera, unblinking, revealed that the war's greatest weapon was empathy, and its greatest casualty too. Every civilization must invent a myth to survive its own violence. For the Greeks, it was Achilles. For the British, the Spitfire. For America, it was the Memphis Belle. A myth built not on conquest, but endurance. Because endurance is the only victory that time cannot erase. And yet, endurance is also tragedy. The men who endured returned to a peace that could not understand them. Factories closed, the sound of engines faded. The war moved into textbooks, but inside the survivors, the sky never stopped burning. They carried its weight quietly, in their sleep, in their silences, in the way they paused before hearing a plane overhead. The strategic legacy of the Memphis Belle was simple. She proved that precision bombing could be sustained, that morale could be mechanized, that courage could be reproduced on an assembly line. But her human legacy whispered something else, that every machine built for war secretly longs to rest. And every man who survives one secretly wishes he hadn't seen so much of the sky. The Memphis Belle rests now beneath museum lights, immaculate, restored, immortalized. Children press their faces against the glass, tracing her name with their fingertips. They see a relic of victory. But history sees something else. It sees 10 young men inside a fragile fortress, ascending again and again into the sky, knowing that each climb might be their last. It sees courage not as spectacle, but as discipline. It sees the paradox that only in risking destruction can humanity prove it deserves to survive. In the quiet of the hangar, the air smells faintly of oil and old metal. The paint gleams. The engines are silent. But if one listens, truly listens, there is still a pulse beneath the rivets, the heartbeat of every man who ever trusted a machine more than his own fear. They were not gods, nor heroes, nor symbols. They were men who chose to fly through hell for the simple, unspoken hope that the world might wake up free. And so, when the lights dim and the hangar settles into its nocturnal silence, the Memphis Belle waits, not as a monument, but as a question. If courage could be built from steel, would we still need the human heart to fly it?